night, little pumpkins. It's time for another bedtime story. And today's story is about a little wooden boy. Are you ready? We're gonna see this adventure of our little friend Pinocchio. Ready? Let's start. This story is called A Nose for Trouble. School was out for the day, and Pinocchio was ready to have some fun. The puppet skipped down to the cobbled street, swinging his books. A small figure followed him, clutching an umbrella. It was Pinocchio's pal, Jiminy Cricket. "Wait for me," he called. Jiminy caught up with Pinocchio in front of the small shop where the puppet lived with Geppetto, his father. Geppetto carved all sorts of things out of wood, but his greatest creation was Pinocchio. That night he finished carving Pinocchio. He'd wished the puppet were a real boy. Then the blue fairy appeared, and it brought Pinocchio to life. If the puppet proved himself worthy, someday he'd become a real boy. Jiminy hopped onto Pinocchio's shoulder and then went into the shop. "Father, I'm home," Pinocchio called. The only answer was a tick-tock from a dozen clock. "Father?" Pinocchio asked. He went into the next room and found Geppetto seated at a workbench. The wood carver looked up surprised. "Hello, son," he said. "I didn't hear you come in. You know how is it when you're working." "What are you making?" Pinocchio asked. "A cuckoo clock," Geppetto replied. "I even brought home a live bird for a model. That way I can carve the cuckoo just right." He pointed to a bird cage. "May I take the bird out and play with him?" Pinocchio asked excitedly. "I'm afraid not," said Geppetto. "You aren't the only one who's been watching him." Geppetto nodded toward Figaro the cat, who's been following the cuckoo's every move. "Please," begged Pinocchio, "I'll be careful." "I'm sorry, son," Geppetto said gently. "I wouldn't want Figaro to chase him." Pinocchio spent the afternoon at the workshop. Every few minutes he gazed up at the bird cage and imagined what fun it would be to have a cuckoo perch on his finger. Pinocchio had never held a live bird before, and he was very curious to find out if it would sing to him. Would it sit on his shoulder and go wherever he wanted? He wondered. At the end of the day, Geppetto went out to the market. As soon as he left, Pinocchio hurried over to the birdcage. "Pinocchio," Jiminy said, "what are you doing?" "Taking the bird out so we can visit," the puppet replied. "Don't worry." As Pinocchio opened the cage door, Figaro jumped onto the table. "Watch out!" Jiminy cried as the cat leaped towards the open cage. Figaro was fast, but the cuckoo was faster. The bird slipped out of the cage. Crash! Figaro hit the side of the cage. The cuckoo flew around the room. "See?" Pinocchio told Jiminy. "I told you it would be fine." "I don't know," the cricket murmured. "You shouldn't have disobeyed your father." The cuckoo darted in and out of the rafters, then began to investigate Geppetto's clock. Wherever the bird went, Figaro followed him. Jiminy climbed onto the windowsill to get a better view. All of a sudden, the cuckoo turned and began flying straight towards him. "Look out!" cried Pinocchio. Jiminy leaped to one side. The cuckoo had just spotted an open window. With a happy cry, he flew past Jiminy and out of the shop. Just then, Geppetto walked in. he gazed at an empty birdcage. "Pinocchio!" he yelled. "I told you not to open the cage. Now look what has happened. I'm very disappointed." Panicked, Pinocchio looked around the room and spotted Figaro. "I didn't do it," he lied. "It was Figaro. He opened the birdcage and ate the cuckoo." "Figaro!" cried Geppetto. He picked up the cat to scold him, which was lucky for Pinocchio because at the moment the puppet's nose began to grow. It inched out farther and farther until it was the length of a crayon. It was growing because he had lied. Pinocchio didn't want his father to realize he had told a lie, so he tried to hide his nose. "Father," Pinocchio said, "I think I'll go to bed early tonight. I'm not feeling well." By the time Pinocchio had gotten under the cover, his nose had grown another inch. The next morning, Pinocchio got up before his father. He sneaked out of bed and ate a hasty breakfast. Then, throwing on his clothes, he headed for the door, calling, "Goodbye, Father, I'm off to school." Jiminy hurried along after him. He knew Pinocchio wasn't going to school because his nose was growing again. "Pinocchio," Jiminy said, "you must start telling the truth." "I can't," cried Pinocchio. "I'll get into too much trouble." Pinocchio hurried through the village, asking people if they'd seen the cuckoo. Then he climbed the bell tower and looked out across the sky. Next, he bought a birdhouse and some seeds, hoping that Cuckoo would stop by for a snack. But he didn't have any luck. Wherever Pinocchio went, Jiminy Cricket followed along, trying to convince him to tell the truth. But Pinocchio wasn't listening. Pinocchio told lie after lie about why he wasn't at school, where he was going, and what he was doing. Each time, his nose grew a little longer. At the end of the day, Pinocchio's nose was longer than ever before, and he still hadn't found the cuckoo. "Maybe you're right," Pinocchio said with a sigh. "It's time to tell the truth." The puppet began to walk back through the streets of the village. Jiminy had to run ahead to clear a path. At least they got home, with Pinocchio arriving several seconds after Jiminy and his nose. Figaro didn't really eat the cuckoo, Pinocchio told his father. "I opened the bird cage and the cuckoo flew away. I'm sorry I disobeyed you, but most of all, I'm sorry I lied." As Pinocchio spoke, his nose became shorter and shorter until it was back to its normal size. "I'm glad you finally told the truth," said Geppetto, "and now I have something to show you." He led Pinocchio inside where something sat on the table, covered with a sheet. Had his father finished carving the clock? Geppetto drew aside the sheet, and under it was a bird cage with the cuckoo inside. "Where did you find him?" Pinocchio asked. "He found me," Geppetto exclaimed. "I was working on the clock today and he flew in through the window. I think he liked it here." "He should," Pinocchio said. "It's the best home anyone could ever want." After dinner, the cuckoo began to chirp. Geppetto played his concertina while Pinocchio and Figaro danced. Before long, night had fallen. Pinocchio yawned. "I think it's time for bed," Geppetto said with a smile. Pinocchio gave his father a hug and got into bed. The cuckoo sang sweetly and everyone drifted off to sleep. The end. Now we know why it's so important to always tell the truth. Now, we learned something very special today, but it's time to go to bed. Now, let's go to sleep. Sweet dreams, little pumpkins. I send you kisses and a big hug. With love, Teacher Iris.